Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about Yellowjackets Season 3, Episode 6, titled Thanksgiving Canada. I'm assuming they call it that because they kind of have a feast throughout the episode, and they're technically in Canada, in the wilderness. For this episode review, we're going to follow a similar format, discussing the two timelines, giving some pros and cons, then an overall episode rating. As a reminder, if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. Now on to the episode, this time starting with the adult storyline. So we open things up with Shauna coming home late, seeing Jeff there waiting up for her. She tells him about Lottie's death. Then Callie overhears it, winds up coming out and freaks out. She shows Shauna the tape that they received many episodes ago in the mail. And then Shauna says they need to pack and go, thinking someone's trying to kill the Yellowjackets, specifically Shauna. We then cut to Misty, who's giving one of her fellow citizen detectives some evidence from under Lottie's nails. At the same time, Walter then texts her, asking about Shauna because she's not responding to him. They do some pretty cool visuals here of the text popping up on screen with Elijah Wood doing a voiceover of the message. We then shift to Shauna and Jeff now at the hotel, and she points out that she suddenly feels very faint. And I feel like at this point, the writers are trying to tell us, oh, maybe she got poisoned, maybe she's not feeling well. But it seems pretty obvious that this is an act by her, and she's wanting Jeff to leave so she can do something. So he winds up taking off, and then she pulls her phone out, and then calls Ty asking for Van. I'm not really sure the point of her calling Ty instead of Van. She points out, oh, Van doesn't like me, so I'm calling you to give her the phone. They were just, I think, all three on the couch in the prior episode, so apparently there's some beef between them. It turns out that Ty and Van are at this resort, and then Shauna says she has this digital audio tape and asks Van for a way to play it. At this point in time, I immediately was like, why would Van have that? But then I realized Van worked at a video store, so it makes sense that would be the request there. She says she'll look for it, and they get off the phone. And then Van gives Ty some grief for trying to avoid the trauma they've been dealing with and trying to feel good instead. And then they both kind of wind up mocking Shauna until Van has the realization, oh, these certain types of tapes are typically held by birders, is what she says. Not sure how she made that connection, but I'm assuming the reason for saying that is to say, oh, Misty has a bird, we see later in the episode even, that makes her maybe responsible for this. Either way, they have a very serious look at each other and wind up rushing off to Shauna. Separately, we have Misty, who's out walking, and she has a limo pull up next to her, and we find out it's courtesy of Walter. He winds up dropping off these trash bags and says, oh, this is from Lottie's trash. I figured I'll give you a chance to look through it. We then cut back to Van, who's going through the old box looking for that player to play that digital audio tape. And then somehow a phone in the box starts ringing. It's not plugged into anything, so there's a lot of mystery going on with this, but she winds up picking it up, and there's some faint voice of Ty, and it seems like she's struggling with something. But then she winds up hanging up the phone, and we see Ty is in the next room over, so there's some kind of weird thing going on there. Then we cut back to Misty, who's going through Lottie's trash, and she gets a hint from a rice box. It sounds like she thinks based off of Lottie's habits, she wouldn't wind up ordering that. So then she goes to the restaurant and sees Lisa from Season 2, who was with Lottie, there, and she winds up riding off her bike, so Misty chases after her. Eventually, Van calls Shauna to let her know that she has the tape player. Then she winds up trying to sneak out, but before doing so, Callie winds up slipping her cell phone into Shauna's bag to try to snoop and see what's going on there. Shauna then goes outside of the car, and they wind up just listening to the tape in the car. And I'm not really sure what all was taking place here. It sounded like there was a lot of evidence of what happened out in the wilderness, and maybe this is kind of some blackmail here. And then back with Misty, she winds up approaching Lisa, and they wind up agreeing to talk about Lottie. We then cut back to the hotel where Jeff's playing cards with Callie and assuring her that everything's under control, which is weird because we just had a scene with Shauna and Jeff where they admit, hey, we haven't done a really good job taking care of you and keeping you safe and protected. A bit strange there, but I guess he's trying to be a comforting parent though. Shauna then comes back into the hotel and sternly wants to speak to Callie about recording her. However, we realize that Shauna was pretty careless here and forgot to delete the item from the trash. She didn't wind up wiping the recently deleted voice recordings, which Callie realizes here. We then cut back to Misty and Lisa talking. We find out that the $50,000 from the prior episode was given to Lisa by Lottie. And then Lisa mentions she saw Ty with Lottie. So this is something that kind of got alluded to in the previous episodes where we had Ty disappear before going on her date with Van in the park. So the speculation there could be that Ty wound up killing Lottie during that time. Conveniently, we then cut to Ty, who's kind of waking up from a nightmare. It seems like she's just screaming, and we get the realization that it seems like she's flipped to evil Ty here, which we haven't really seen a lot of in this season in the adult form of things. So it seems like the implication there was that Ty may have done this to Lottie, but I'm not sure if that's a misdirect or just some clear evidence of pointing towards that. The adult storyline closes out with Misty getting the DNA sample back from her guy and forwarding it on to Walter for help. We see Misty has the bird here once again, so this really calls out Misty as a potential suspect as well, and they're all kind of accusing each other and turning on each other at this point in time. Hey, it's me from the future. I kind of talked about this already, but I'm pretty sure the reason we haven't seen as much of an adult Ty flipping between good and evil is because she's in a permanent evil Ty mode right now. This would explain Sammy not wanting to be around her, the strange phone in the box call that Van received, likely from Good Ty, and Ty screaming in bed briefly. Once again, Good Ty trying to escape. That part specifically reminds me of Get Out, the movie, if you've seen that. My prediction at this point is that Evil Ty did kill Lottie. Also, I separately think Melissa delivered that tape to Shauna's house. Anyway, back to the video. And then transitioning to the kids storyline, we start off with Natalie feeding the coach. We repeatedly get scenes of the coach suggesting to Natalie that she kill him and end his pain and suffering, but she says no every time. Eventually, the coach says to her that he burned down the cabin, but it seems like a pretty desperate attempt here, more than an actual confession. It feels like a strange transition, and I get there's a lot of things that took place between the last episode and this one, but in the prior episode, when he was going to get shot, they wound up having to cover his face, and he was screaming, pleading for his life. From then until now, he has lost all hope. I don't know if we want to say the Achilles slice is really what did it for him, but it seems like, whether logical or not, we went from a very confident, I want to live coach to, this is it, I can't handle this anymore, I'm done, kill me at this point. And it's very possible he just wound up reaching his breaking point and wound up snapping now. We cut to Ty and Van gossiping about Shauna and Mel, and at this point, I'm wondering, why are their clothes so clean? It seems like they should look like they're in a lot worse shape, even if they have some structure around them. Their physical appearances, I feel like, should be a lot dirtier and grimier, but either way, we'll move forward. We then cut to Mari, who's now responsible for feeding the coach because Natalie says, I'm out, you guys have to do this as chores now. And Mari winds up finding out that the coach is not eating, has been wasting all the food they've been giving him for the last week, so it's just all gone bad. We have Travis approach Natalie and questions if the visions are real at this point. And then we cut to Misty, who's asking Coach Ben to eat, and he winds up refusing. They wind up holding him down and using like a feeding tube. I don't know where they got that from, this wilderness, but once again, we're just going to accept that as reality. But they wind up having to force food down his throat so he doesn't die. I don't really get why they're wearing masks in this scene. We obviously know who they are. I don't know if they're really ashamed of themselves, and that's why they're wearing masks to kind of cover up their shame for doing so. But they're all dressed up in masks as if we don't know who they are. Akila has been pretty doubtful throughout this episode as far as believing what took place with her vision, so she winds up going back to the cave and seeing Lottie there. She goes in to try to get more answers from the wilderness, and sees this really weird animated bear with a third eye. She says she doesn't know what it means, and neither do I. I don't know if we were trying to imply that maybe that they're going to get eaten. We then cut to Natalie, who grabs a knife, heading over to the coach, and Travis stops her for a second, but realizes, okay, I'm going to let you go. And here's once again where we get that kind of tonal shift from the coach as far as saying, yes, definitely kill me, I'm done, take me out at this point, which varies dramatically from the prior episode where he was begging for his life. Natalie winds up stabbing him in the chest and killing him. There's some really great acting by Natalie's actress here, showing a very traumatized face by the whole experience. Then the girls, mostly Misty, wind up freaking out. Misty winds up being super creepy with the dead coach. She even goes up and kisses him. Then the girls all start yelling at Natalie and decide that Shauna is going to be the new leader, which is awesome to see. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. Not a big fan of Shauna. Although I will say there's suddenly a flip switched for Shauna here. Suddenly when she's appointed as being in charge, she's like, let's honor the coach, give the wilderness what it wants. Although she does force Natalie to ultimately prepare the feast for them, aka cook Coach Ben. We then cut to the feast and see Van telling Ty that Shauna seems much better as the leader. Misty starts singing, and then Lottie starts freaking out that things aren't going as intended, and then just winds up screaming. Then the wilderness screams back at them. Lottie then says that they should all start singing and all screaming, and then the wilderness is once again screaming back at them. It feels like they've all just gone super mad and are dancing around the fire. Lottie then sees somebody in the shadows and thinks it's Coach Ben, but then we have a guy and a girl wind up approaching them. He says hello to the girls, but then freaks out when he sees Coach Ben's head on the ground, and then the episode just kind of ends there and cuts off with a cliffhanger. So jumping into some of the pros I have for the episode, the first one I have here is they stopped dragging out the coach dying storyline. I really like the coach as a character, but it was definitely time to let him go at this point. They've really dragged on his death for so long, and while I wanted him to stick around, it feels like there was a point of no return for him ultimately. Second one, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, I really like the texting visual and audio approach that they went with here. When characters like Misty and Walter were engaging back and forth, or her with her citizen detective. And then final pro, I'll say, I like the acting for the most part throughout this episode, especially with the teenage group. Natalie specifically stuck out as a very strong performer here. Then jumping to some of the cons for this episode, so they keep adding more questions without answers. I've talked about this a little bit before, but we have, who are these two new people in the teenager storyline? What was that creature in the vision? Did Ty kill Lottie? What do we hear on that tape? What will Callie do with the information that she gets from the recording? There just continues to be a lot of questions get added and no answers really at this point in time. So I'm hoping as we wind down, we're kind of on the back half of the season, we need to start closing out some of these storylines and getting some answers, unless we want to extend those into the next season, I guess. And then the other con I pointed out already, their appearances are way too clean here for being trapped in the wilderness for that long, unless we want to say it's all in their head, and they actually look much worse than we're seeing, but I'm not sure they're going to go down that road. And if they're not, it feels like you have too many resources, you have too much availability as far as having a plane crash and being stranded for that situation ultimately. So then jumping to an episode score here, I'm going to give this one a neutral rating. I like the acting here, but but some of the plot lines here I feel like are still going too slow for season 3, and we continue to stack up more questions needing answered. Also, unrelated to the scoring here, but isn't Hilary Swank supposed to be in the season? We only have 4 episodes left, so I'm not really sure what her inclusion is going to entail. This whole time I thought she may be playing the older version of Melissa, but I'm not sure what we're going to get with her. It's weird not to have her in the show at this point in time. Maybe she'll also be in season 4, because that prominent of an actress and not really including them in most of the season feels like a weird choice, but we'll have to see there and see what the payoff is. But tell me what you thought. Were you a fan of this episode? What parts did you like or dislike? I've said this for the last couple of reviews, but any theories on Lottie's death, what's with these 2 new strangers, or anything else you want to discuss regarding this episode? Sound off on all things Yellowjackets in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.